Hi there everyone, and welcome to RPG Horror Stories with DnD Doge. In today's video, we have a story about why communicating about in-game problems is so important in games like Dungeons & Dragons, and why taking out frustrations with other players in-game never ends well. But before we get to that, as of posting this video, I will have had my ear surgery that hopefully fixes the constant ringing I've been having in it for the past 2.5 months. And just wanted to say that all your well wishes have really helped me get through all of this, and making these videos has been helpful in maintaining my sanity. Well, that and the kitties. So again, I just want to say thanks, and the fact that you all enjoy these videos has really helped out. But with that said, let's get into today's doozy of a story. How a feud between an edgelord and a sexist weeaboo almost derailed the campaign, by Reddit user Phantom Skylar. So, a few caveats about the story before we begin. There isn't really a bombastic resolution to the story, because the campaign ended prematurely due to a lack of time on the DM and the other players' schedules, which inevitably is the true villain of any tabletop RPG. Second, this isn't going to be the typical tale of the innocent player versus the cartoonishly vile neckbeard antagonist that I'm sure many are used to with these stories here, since I'm not particularly an innocent party in this tale, and in fact, I am the edgelord in the title. While the weeaboo was a pretty crappy person, and I chalked up a lot of my actions to inexperience with tabletop RPG etiquette and lacking in common sense due to my youth and social awkwardness, I ended up breaking some cardinal rules of tabletop RPG groups that I'm rather ashamed of looking back, and probably would have handled the situation better if I was my older self. A final point, this is a story from a part of my life that was at least 12 years ago, so my memory is fuzzy on some details, and that names have been changed and yada yada. So this would functionally be my second taste of tabletop RPGs, playing 3.5 edition Dungeons & Dragons. I was still a newbie in college, and a socially awkward nerd for context, and my best friend had invited me to an online session with a group of people. It was a homebrew, with a decently fleshed out world, with a plot about stopping an evil xenophobic empire that really didn't like non-humans with other twists and turns. This was a sizable group, but I'll only highlight the major players in this story. There was myself, whose character was, and ready your cringe medicine, a gruff antisocial holy rogue, basically a 4th edition Avenger, which was a rogue, but with paladin and cleric-like backgrounds. But if I remember correctly, the DM said Avengers weren't part of 3.5, but allowed me to tool a basic rogue ranger hybrid, and signed off on the holy background elements. I'll spare the details of his tragic backstory, except for what was important. He was a child slave to a depraved cult that worshipped an abysmal being that frequently used magic to hypnotize and enslave people, but was rescued by Bahamut-worshipping paladins and Avengers. So he has an in-character issue with magics that mess around with the mind, and especially types that are mind control type stuff. This will be important soon. Then there was Lena, my best friend. They had made a friendly shy cleric, who had a dark secret that sadly never got its payoff because the campaign ended prematurely. There was Natalie, another player I'd be closer with than most of the group, save for Lena. Her character was a flirty and snarky drow ninja. I can't remember if that was the actual class, but she was functionally that. Our characters were often paired together for the stealth and recon parts of the sessions, and had a bit of a funny dynamic of her drow teasing and flirting with the socially awkward and rigid Avenger, that eventually bloomed into romantic ship teasing that most of the party was amused by. We'd end up dating briefly in real life, but it didn't last long as we broke up on healthy mutual terms. While not important to the story, this context will be important later for why I antagonized the weeaboo. There was also Jane and Larry, a husband and wife duo who ran a lot of online tabletop RPG games. Jane was the DM, and Larry was the player. They both played a husband and wife fighter and bard duo, who were wanted revolutionaries fighting an evil empire that I mentioned. While functionally, they were DMPCs, to the pair's credit, they made sure that the two characters weren't crazy powerful. And outside of pushing the fight the empire plot, they took a back seat to allow us to explore our characters, with the pair basically being team mom and dad to our group. And then, finally, the weeaboo of the story, Dave. Dave's character checked off all of the cringe boxes. He was this crazy powerful kitsune sorcerer wizard. I forget his exact class, but it was magical. He was from a not Japan type country, who was also this smarmy perfect young lord looking for honor. And a harem, because of course he was. The major point of contention with him, that would kick off me and Natalie's feud with Dave, was an NPC tied to his character. There was a tavern girl that he had met on his journeys before joining the party that, and I'm not joking, he literally hypnotized with his magic to become his traveling companion and lover, and he treated this as a romantic thing without a hint of subversion or irony. The NPC was this very docile and demure wallflower that basically lavished and obsessed over Dave and practically worshipped him. I think you're all getting a good picture of Dave's psyche. Now, by today's standards, obviously this dude would be cancelled so quick for such a disgusting and rapey element to his character. But this was 12 years ago, so for whatever reason, the DM didn't take issue with this. A bit more on that later. I should mention that our group had a sizable number of ladies, and I can only personally account for how a handful of them felt about Dave and his harem wish fulfillment mind control antics. Back in my college days, I was a rather low-level edgelord, and the typical lonely, seeking a girlfriend, desperate nerd with a handful of now very outdated opinions on relationships that would make adult me want to kick younger me's ass over. But even then, I found Dave's role-playing with his NPC to be disgusting and creepy, and never cared for his smarmy, better than everyone else attitude. While I found him annoying, Natalie utterly loathed him. During our early sessions, things went well. I was integrated into the party decently, and in general, left a good impression with my character. Mostly how he started off as a typical boring and cold edgelord badass who, through actions in the story and character interactions with the other players, I ended up tooling into this socially awkward dork who was trying too hard to look intimidating and clearly masking his past trauma, which the players, Nat especially, found much more enjoyable than my stick-in-the-mud Assassin's Creed knockoff that I started out as. More or less, the roleplay was nice and chill. Except when Dave got involved. As I quickly learned up until my joining, Dave was constantly flirting with the other female player characters, and continued to do so even when, in character, they either politely declined his advances, or made it clear that they found them uncomfortable. But Dave wasn't picking up on that. He would even try his freaking hypnosis spells on player characters, like he did with his NPC waifu. But thankfully, the DM made him have to pass extremely high rolls, and even then, at worst, the effects were just to have the characters brush off his Kitsune Lord's totally not predatory behavior, as him being a silly skirt chaser, and pay him no more mind than that. So, the first time he tried this creepy crap while I was in the party, he was trying to flirt with Nat's very not interested drow ninja. He apparently, out of all the party's women, had a fixation on Nat's character, and was obsessed with adding her to his one waifu harem. So when the drow tells him to buzz off, he tries to subtly perform his hypnosis spell on her. Now, my Avenger is nearby when this happens, and this is where our feud with Dave really began. See, back then, I was still a complete noob to tabletop RPGs, so I was ignorant of the concept of metagaming. I knew about his creepy little hypnosis trick with the tavern waifu because of a cringy backstory of how they met that he posted on his DeviantArt account that was tied to a DA group that we used to post backstory info, art, and other things about our characters. My Divine Punisher Avenger, however, did not know this. My Avenger walked over and roughly grabbed the Kitsune Lord's wrist, and pulled him up, snarling that he sees what perverse tricks that he's trying to do, and I won't allow him to take advantage of the drow, as much as, at the time, the two distrusted each other. Dave got upset at this, accusing me of metagaming and wanting to the DM to do something about it. At that point, the DM explained to me what metagaming was, and at first was taking Dave's side. However, Nat came to my defense, pointing out that in my backstory sheet, which was also in the DA group's gallery, that given the Avenger's dark backstory, he would reasonably know the signs of someone using mind control magics, and Nat taking my side clearly did not sit well with Dave. The DM, to her credit, decided to split the baby, to try and defuse the situation. She accepted that my Avenger's backstory would give me insight into how mind control magic worked, and at best, reasonably assume that's what the Kitsune Lord was trying. However, Dave had to roll a deception check to force Avenger to drop the subject as a misunderstanding. He rolled good, and Avenger lets it slide, but is clearly having his suspicions. In character, Nat's Drow Ninja briskly but sincerely thanks the Avenger for coming to her aid, though making it clear that she had it under control, and that she was tougher than any paltry mind trick that the Kitsune had, but was surprised that an antisocial holy assassin would come to a thieving money-hungry Drow's defense. Avenger awkwardly comments that he finds the actions of people more damning than their race or creed. This exchange is what sparked the romance-teasing side plot between Avenger and Drow Ninja, and unfortunately began me and Nat's feud with Dave. In between sessions, Nat and I would grow closer and talk more by ourselves on Skype about our interest in mutual shows that we liked, along with some ideas for Avenger and Drow Ninja's relationship, just so neither of us tried to do something that the other was uncomfortable with, instead of springing it up mid-game. However, we also talked about our mutual dislike of Dave and his creepy sex pest of a Kitsune Lord. We especially took umbrage with his mind control sex slave NPC, the Tavern Waifu. Generally speaking, the party awkwardly danced around this problematic element of Dave's character, since the NPC basically disappeared for long stretches of the sessions, and the DM tried her best to keep people from picking a fight over it, with Nat specifically. However, Nat figured my character's introduction to the party and edgy backstory was finally the perfect in-game justification she needed to take Dave down a peg, since the DM already ruled that the Avenger had some knowledge of how hypnosis spells worked and could sniff out Dave's antics. So we conspired to finally find a way to, in-game, learn the truth of and break the mind control on the Tavern Waifu and expose the Kitsune Lord for the rapey creep that he was, and knock the wind out of Dave a bit. Between my own dislike of Dave and my growing crush on Nat, I was all in on this plan. Now, I'm gonna pause the story to make one thing perfectly clear. I am not blaming Nat for my choices to metagame and grief another player. While Dave, up to this point, had been an obnoxious and unsettling sex pest, in and to a lesser extent out of character, he's going to be revealed to be so much worse, as I'll reveal near the end. His crappy non-consensual antics don't justify Nat and me beginning a little personal crusade against him, and engage in borderline metagaming, and trying to derail a player's character out of petty vigilante spite. So, in between side quests and plots, and Avenger and Drow's budding romance, the two would subtly try to expose Dave, who he himself was picking up on our dislike of him, and often tried to turn the party against the violent pair, often using his spells, or lower-level hypnosis tricks, to embarrass or trip up our characters, my Avenger especially. At first, the party brushed this off as harmless role-playing, as it was things like him hypnotizing my Avenger to take a plunge into a lake, or Nat's Drow sticking her foot out to make him faceplant onto a stone dungeon floor. They just treated it as a meaningless prank war between the three. However, Things came to a head when he actually tried to hypnotize Drow into taking her clothes off. Now, after the fact, he claimed, out of character, his only intention was to embarrass her by making her streak across the hall of the area that we were in, and that there was nothing sexual about it, though both me and Nat called BS on this. Nat rolled high enough to avoid it, but chose to use deception to make Dave believe that she was under his spell. Nat and I had been private messaging each other as this was starting to play out, and figured that this was the best time as any to deal with Dave and his date rapist of a kitsune. So I positioned myself near them as it played out, and the justification I gave the DM when it played out was, not only because of seeing someone Avenger had grown to care for seemingly in trouble, but also the specific action triggering some very effed up bad memories with the mind control cult that he was enslaved to. So this drives Avenger into a rage and attacks Kitsune Lord from behind. Dave is not happy about this, accusing us of setting him up, which, granted, he was half right about, but it didn't change the fact that he tried to make Nat's player character get naked for him. There's a brief fight between Avenger and Drow Ninja versus Kitsune Lord and his tavern waifu, who of course comes to her beloved master's aid, until the revolutionary couple DNPCs come in and break it up. Now, things are awkward both in and out of game, as everyone, especially the DM, has fully picked up on the mutual animosity between me and Nat against Dave, who accuses us of tag teaming and bullying him. We comment that we're sick of his creepy borderline sexual offender-like antics, and a mild fight ensues. The game is paused briefly while the DM and her husband basically run the three of us through the tabletop RPG counseling. To their credit, they admit that they did find Dave's actions a bit unsettling, but didn't want to feel like they were singling him out, for reasons that will become clear in a minute, and said that our issues with Dave were valid. However, they could not abide our scheming and borderline metagaming plot to one-up and embarrass Dave, which was straight-up player griefing, which, looking back, they were very justified in calling us out on. As much of a creep as Dave was, it didn't justify our tabletop RPG vigilantism against him, and we should have gone to the DM couple directly about our issues with Dave's sex pest antics. So, finally, things get back to quote-unquote normal. We agreed to stop our in-character feud with Dave's character, while Dave agreed to no longer use the hypnosis on his party mates. The animosity between us was still there, via slight snipes and the occasional harmless pranks against each other, but it never escalated again. Eventually, another party member, we'll just call her Sam, and my best friend Lena were talking with me via Skype, and both are concerned about the grudge between me and Nat against Dave, with Lena especially not liking the drama that it was causing. I admit that we took things far, but just couldn't stand the dude. This was when Sam, who, bless her kind soul, dropped a huge bombshell on us about Dave to try and get us to sympathize with him for a little bit. That kind of made things worse. Apparently, Dave was using an alt account, and his actual account on DeviantArt was one belonging to an infamous, for DA, cringelord who was known in DA circles for these incredibly sexist and tasteless fanfiction, and hilariously bad art of said fanfiction, that was about this OC dude, who was very obviously a self-insert of himself that looked almost exactly like his Kitsune Lord, savagely beating up and berating female characters that he didn't like, or badly romancing the ones that he did like. It was some maximum early 2000s yikes stuff. Sam reveals that, according to the DM couple, who knew Dave personally on some level if I'm remembering this part correctly, that he suffered from a number of mental health troubles, and that the reason they invited him and basically handled his troubling sex pest behavior with kid gloves up until me and Nat's crusade against him was because they felt sorry for him, and were trying to subtly help him overcome his issues with women bit by bit. However, 18-year-old me, admittedly not taking the mental health issues part as seriously as I should have, knew of his violent sexist cringelord persona, and commented, "Finding that out makes me hate him even more." And my best friend admitted finding out that he was that guy made him less sympathetic, and made him take my side more in this feud, much to poor Sam's dismay. Seriously, Sam, if you somehow come across this and remember this campaign, I am so sorry. I know you were trying your best to make us all come together. However, this is sadly the end of the story, as at this point, things got busy in the DM couples and other players' lives, and it was put on an indefinite hiatus until it was basically dead. There was no big final confrontation between us and Dave. He just slinked away into the interwebs, just becoming both a bad memory and a lingering reminder of my past cruddy actions. A few of us started up a new game together, myself, Lena, Nat, and Sam, with some new people, and we had a fun time. Though I've sadly grown apart from everyone sans Lena, and I do miss them. While the story was mostly taking the piss out of Dave and his creepy sex pest actions in-game, I think I made it clear neither me nor Nat were the heroes of the story either. As obnoxious and pervy as Dave was, mental issues or no, they did not justify our actions against him. If you have a problem with a player, bring it up with the DM, unless there's favoritism going on, or the DM is as much of a prick as the problem player. Most good DMs will try to help resolve the situation to avoid drama. But ultimately, that was probably my most dramatic experience with tabletop RPGs, which I ashamedly had a hand in. Dave, I hope you got the help that you very clearly needed, and I am sorry for griefing you. Man, now that one was a bit of a horror story with almost everyone involved. First, again, this is why communication is so important in Dungeons & Dragons. Dave's character was making the other players uncomfortable for pretty obvious reasons, especially when he started to use mind control in the other players. This should have been brought up to the DM out of game, and maybe come up to a solution that way, instead of OP and Nat coming up with a way to get back at him in game. Though, at least in the end, OP grew up a bit and realized the folly of his actions years later. And like OP said, hopefully Dave did eventually get the help that it definitely seemed like he needed. But that is all I have for you today, and hopefully right now, I'm resting and chilling out with some decent pain meds. But as always, I appreciate all of you, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.